I still remember the exact moment my life changed forever. I was sitting in that mahogany-paneled conference room at Patterson and Amp Associates, my hands folded nervously in my lap, watching my husband Marcus bounce his leg under the table like a child waiting for Christmas morning. The expensive Persian rug beneath our feet was a deep burgundy with intricate gold patterns that probably cost more than I made in 6 months as a pediatric nurse, and the oil paintings on the walls depicted distinguished black men in suits who looked like they had built empires and never worried about money a day in their lives. The room itself was intimidating in its old-world elegance. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound legal volumes that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. The conference table was massive, easily 12 feet long, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the crystal chandelier hanging above us. Everything in this room whispered power, tradition, and serious money, exactly the kind of environment that made me feel like I didn't belong. My name is Sarah Washington, and 3 years ago, I made what everyone told me was the mistake of my life. I fell in love with Marcus Whitmore, golden boy of one of Atlanta's most prominent and wealthy black families. They said I was reaching above my station, that a girl whose parents owned a small hair salon in southwest Atlanta had no business dreaming about marrying into old money and social prominence. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have listened to the warnings about how different we were, how his world of Jack and Jill cotillions, Lynx chapters, and elite social clubs would never truly accept me, how love wasn't always enough to bridge the gap between working-class hustle and generational wealth. But I was young and naive and desperately in love with a man who made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. At least, he used to make me feel that way. Now, sitting in this imposing law office surrounded by Marcus's entire family, I felt like an intruder at a private party where everyone knew the rules except me. Robert and Patricia Whitmore, Marcus's parents, sat across from us wearing expressions of polite indifference mixed with barely concealed resentment. Robert was a distinguished man in his mid-60s with graying temples and the kind of quiet authority that came from running successful businesses for decades. He was still handsome, with strong features and intelligent eyes behind expensive wire-rimmed glasses. His suit was clearly custom-tailored, probably costing more than most people's monthly salary, and he wore it with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Patricia was a stunningly elegant woman who maintained her beauty through expensive treatments and designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was in her late 50s but could have passed for 10 years younger, with flawless makeup that highlighted her high cheekbones and full lips. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated bob that framed her face perfectly, and she wore pearls that I was certain were real and worth more than my car. Despite her beauty, there was a coldness in her demeanor when she looked at me, as if she were evaluating a piece of furniture she was considering for purchase. His brother Derek kept checking his phone, clearly bored by the proceedings. Derek was 31, 2 years younger than Marcus, and handsome in the same way Marcus was, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes, but he carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. He was an investment banker like Marcus, and equally successful, which meant he was equally dismissive of anyone he considered beneath his social status. His sister Amanda was examining her perfectly manicured nails as if the state of her nail polish was more interesting than the reading of their beloved grandmother's will. Amanda was breathtakingly beautiful, with flawless dark skin and features that could have graced magazine covers, but her beauty was matched by a cold calculation that made her intimidating rather than approachable. She was 29, worked in marketing for a luxury goods company, and had never bothered to hide her disdain for me from the moment Marcus first brought me to a family dinner. They all wore black, expensive morning clothes that whispered money and status. Robert's suit was clearly Armani or Tom Ford, Patricia's dress was probably designer with a price tag that would make me faint, Derek's outfit looked like it came straight from a GQ photo shoot, and Amanda's ensemble was effortlessly chic in the way that only comes from having unlimited shopping budgets and personal stylists. I wore the one black dress I owned, a simple sheath I had bought at Nordstrom Rack 2 years ago for another family funeral. It was perfectly appropriate, but I could feel their eyes cataloging every detail of my appearance, noting that my jewelry was modest, my handbag was last season, my shoes were practical rather than fashionable. I was the outsider, the girl who didn't belong, the mistake their precious Marcus had made when he chose emotion over good sense. Only grandmother Evelyn had ever treated me differently. Evelyn Whitmore had been 92 years old when she died peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks ago, and she had been the only member of Marcus's family who had ever looked at me and seen a person rather than a social climbing opportunist. She had been a regal woman with silver hair always perfectly styled, skin that remained luminous even in her 90s, and eyes that held the wisdom of nearly a century of living. Grandmother Evelyn had been born in 1931, during the height of the Great Depression, to a family that had already established themselves as part of Atlanta's black elite. Her father had been one of the first black men to own a successful construction company in the city, and her mother had been a schoolteacher who helped found one of the first schools for black children in their neighborhood. She had grown up with privilege, but she had also witnessed the struggles of the civil rights movement firsthand and had never forgotten what it meant to fight for dignity and respect. She had married Marcus's grandfather, Charles Whitmore, in 1952, and together they had built a business empire that included real estate development, construction companies, and investments that had made them one of the wealthiest black families in the Southeast. But despite their success, Grandmother Evelyn had never lost touch with her values or forgotten the importance of treating every person with kindness and respect, regardless of their background or social status. While the rest of the family maintained polite but cold interactions with me, Grandmother Evelyn had invited me for tea, asked about my work at the Children's Hospital, and listened with genuine interest when I told her stories about my parents and their journey from rural Georgia to Atlanta. She had been the one person in Marcus's family who made me feel welcome, who treated me like I belonged, who saw value in who I was rather than focusing on who I wasn't. During our conversations, she would tell me stories about her own youth, about the challenges she had faced as a young woman trying to find her place in a changing world, and about the importance of staying true to your values even when it would be easier to compromise. "Sarah, dear," she had told me during one of our afternoon tea sessions about 6 months ago, "the most important thing in life isn't what other people think of you. It's what you think of yourself, and whether you can look in the mirror each morning and be proud of the person staring back at you." I had treasured those conversations, partly because they were the only times I felt truly accepted by Marcus's family, and partly because Grandmother Evelyn's wisdom and perspective helped me navigate the complicated social dynamics of being married into a world where I would always be seen as an outsider. Now she was gone, and I was about to sit through the reading of her will surrounded by people who had never wanted me in their family in the first place. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand, and I could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat from a radiator. He was a beautiful man, 6 feet tall with the kind of classic good looks that turned heads wherever we went. His skin was a rich brown that seemed to glow with health and vitality, his features were perfectly proportioned, and his smile could light up entire rooms when he chose to use it. He kept himself in excellent shape through regular workouts and careful attention to his diet, and he dressed with the kind of effortless style that came from having unlimited shopping budgets and an intuitive sense of fashion. But lately, that charm and warmth had been reserved for other people, colleagues, clients, anyone who might help advance his career. With me, he had become increasingly critical and distant, as if my presence in his life was something he needed to manage rather than celebrate. He had been talking about this day for months, ever since his grandmother's health had started declining. As the eldest grandson and the one who carried the family name, he had always been told he would be her primary heir. "It's just a formality," he had whispered to me that morning as we got dressed in our cramped bedroom. "Grandmother always said the bulk of her estate would go to me. We're finally going to be able to get out of this cramped apartment and start living the kind of life we deserve." The life we deserve. That phrase had been coming up more and more frequently in Marcus's vocabulary over the past 2 years, ever since we had gotten married and he had started comparing our modest lifestyle to those of his colleagues and friends. Our 2-bedroom apartment in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood wasn't good enough anymore. My 10-year-old Honda Civic was embarrassing to him. My job as a pediatric nurse, while fulfilling to me, was seen as evidence of my lack of ambition and social awareness. Marcus worked at an investment firm downtown, and while his salary was respectable, it wasn't enough to support the lifestyle he believed he deserved as a Whitmore. He wanted the house in Buckhead with the circular driveway and the 3-car garage, the luxury cars that would announce his success to anyone who saw him, the country club memberships that would give him access to the right social circles, the European vacations that would provide sophisticated conversation topics at dinner parties. All the trappings of success that would prove to the world that he had lived up to his family's expectations and earned his place among Atlanta's black elite. Grandmother Evelyn's inheritance was supposed to make all of that possible. Eleanor Patterson, the family attorney who had been handling Whitmore legal affairs for 3 decades, cleared her throat and opened the leather portfolio containing the will. She was an elegant black woman in her 70s with silver hair styled in a sophisticated chignon and the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of delivering life-changing news to people who thought they knew what to expect. Eleanor had been Grandmother Evelyn's friend as well as her attorney, and I could see the genuine sadness in her eyes as she prepared to read the final wishes of someone she had known and respected for so many years. She was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that was both professional and stylish, with understated jewelry that spoke of good taste and financial security. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice formal but kind. "I know this is a difficult time for the family, but Evelyn was very specific about her wishes, and she wanted me to communicate them clearly to everyone at once. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked around the table, making eye contact with each person present. I could see her taking measure of each family member, noting their expressions and body language, probably wondering how they would react to what she was about to reveal. Before I begin reading the will itself, I want to share something that Evelyn asked me to convey. She wanted you all to know that she made these decisions with great care and love, and that every provision reflects her hopes for your future happiness and success. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, and I could see his anticipation building. His breathing had become slightly faster, and he kept unconsciously touching his watch, a Rolex his grandmother had given him for his college graduation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that would transform our lives and allow him to step into the role he had always believed was his birthright. Eleanor began reading through the smaller bequests first. Robert and Patricia would receive the family home in Martha's Vineyard, a beautiful oceanfront property that had been in the family for 40 years, and $500,000. Derek would get $300,000 and the collection of first edition books that had been assembled over several generations. Amanda would receive $300,000 and most of the jewelry collection, including pieces that had been passed down through multiple generations of Whitmore women. Each announcement was met with polite nods and expressions of gratitude, though I could see the subtle disappointment on Robert's face. $500,000 was generous by most standards, but it was clearly less than he had hoped for. Patricia maintained her composed expression, but I noticed her grip tighten slightly on her designer handbag. As Eleanor continued through the list of smaller gifts, money for various cousins, donations to favorite charities, bequests to longtime household staff who had served the family faithfully for decades, I watched Marcus grow more excited and impatient. If everyone else was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars, his inheritance as the primary heir must be substantial indeed. The room felt charged with anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air becomes thick and electric. I could hear the subtle sounds that usually go unnoticed, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant traffic from the street below, the scratch of Eleanor's pen on her legal pad as she made notes. Finally, Eleanor reached what appeared to be the main provision of the will. "And now," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "to the remainder of my estate, including my primary residence, my investment portfolio, my art collection, and all other assets not previously designated, totaling approximately $8.5 million, I leave everything to my granddaughter-in-law, Sarah Washington Whitmore." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. For several seconds, I wondered if I had misheard, if there had been some mistake, if Eleanor had read the wrong name from the document. The words seemed to echo in the air, impossible and surreal. $8.5 million. To me. Marcus's face went through a startling transformation, first confusion, then shock, then a deep red flush that spread from his collar to his hairline. His mouth opened and closed several times without any sound emerging, like he was trying to speak but had forgotten how language worked. His hand flew to his chest as if he were having trouble breathing, and I could see sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the room. The rest of the family erupted in a chaos of voices, everyone talking at once, demanding explanations, questioning the validity of the document. Amanda's voice rose above the others, shrill with disbelief. "This is impossible. There has to be some mistake." Derek had dropped his phone and was staring at Eleanor as if she had announced that aliens had landed on the roof. "What do you mean, Sarah? Our grandmother left $8 million to Sarah?" Patricia was shaking her head in disbelief, her perfectly styled hair not moving an inch. "Eleanor, surely there's been an error in the paperwork. Evelyn would never leave the family fortune to." She gestured vaguely in my direction, unable to finish the sentence, as if saying the words aloud would make them true. To an outsider, Amanda supplied viciously, her beautiful features twisted with anger and disbelief. To someone who's been in the family for exactly 3 years. To someone who doesn't understand what it means to be a Whitmore. Robert had gone completely pale, his distinguished features slack with shock. "Eleanor, I need you to explain this to me very carefully. Are you saying that my mother left the bulk of her estate, $8.5 million, to my daughter-in-law instead of to her children and grandchildren?" Marcus finally found his voice. "This can't be right," he said, his words coming out in a hoarse croak. "Grandmother always told me I would inherit the majority of her estate. I'm the eldest grandson. I carry the family name. She promised me." Eleanor rapped her knuckles on the table, calling for quiet. Her expression remained calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around her, and I could see that she had expected this reaction. "I understand this is shocking," she said calmly. "But I can assure you that this will was prepared with meticulous care and attention to detail. Evelyn was of completely sound mind when she made these decisions, and she underwent extensive medical and psychological evaluation to ensure there could be no question about her mental competence. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew a sealed envelope, holding it up so everyone could see it. Evelyn also asked me to include a letter explaining her reasoning. This letter is addressed specifically to Marcus, but she requested that it be read aloud so that the entire family could understand her decision. Marcus was staring at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. I could see him trying to process what had just happened, trying to reconcile his lifelong expectations with this shocking reality. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and I was beginning to worry that he might actually faint. "Read it," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "Read the letter." Eleanor opened the envelope carefully and unfolded several pages covered in Grandmother Evelyn's distinctive handwriting, the same elegant script I had seen on birthday cards and thank you notes over the past 3 years. Even her handwriting was beautiful, flowing and graceful in a way that spoke of excellent education and refined breeding. "My dearest Marcus," she began, and her voice took on a more personal tone, as if she were channeling Grandmother Evelyn's own words. "I know that my decision will come as a profound shock to you and to the entire family. I want you to understand that this choice was not made lightly, impulsively, or without tremendous consideration and care." I felt every eye in the room focused on me, studying my reaction, trying to gauge whether I had known this was coming. The truth was that I was as stunned as everyone else. I had never in my wildest dreams imagined that Grandmother Evelyn would leave me anything more than a piece of jewelry or a small memento. For the past 3 years, Marcus, I have been watching and listening. I have been observing how you treat the people closest to you, how you define success and happiness, and what kind of man you are becoming. What I have seen has both broken my heart and opened my eyes to some painful truths about the values I may have inadvertently instilled in my family. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I could see that Grandmother Evelyn's words were hitting their mark with surgical precision. "When you first brought Sarah into our family, I was delighted. Here was a young woman who was intelligent, compassionate, hardworking, and clearly devoted to you. She was absolutely beautiful, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and kindness. She carried herself with grace and dignity, and she treated every person she encountered with genuine warmth and respect." I felt tears starting to gather in my eyes as Eleanor continued reading. Grandmother Evelyn's words were like a balm to wounds I didn't even realize I had been carrying. She had built a career dedicated to caring for others, working with sick children and their families during some of the most difficult moments of their lives. I watched her interact with my housekeeper, my gardener, the delivery people who came to the house, and she treated everyone with the same courtesy and kindness, regardless of their position or status. Eleanor paused to take a sip of water, and I could see that she was moved by the contents of the letter as well. "Sarah brought out qualities in you that I hadn't seen since you were a child, Marcus. She made you laugh more freely, encouraged you to be more generous with your time and attention, and seemed to inspire in you a desire to be a better man. I hope that her influence would help you remember what truly matters in life: love, service to others, integrity, and the importance of character over status." Marcus was staring down at the table now, his jaw clenched tightly. "Instead, I have watched you gradually begin to resent her for not being born into wealth, for not having family connections that could advance your career, for not being the kind of wife who could help you climb the social ladder more quickly." The accuracy of Grandmother Evelyn's observations was breathtaking and painful. Every criticism she was describing reflected conversations I had had with Marcus over the past 2 years, conversations that usually ended with him storming out and me crying alone in our bedroom, wondering what I had done wrong. "I have listened to you complain that Sarah's family is too ordinary to be useful to your professional advancement. I have heard you criticize her for being satisfied with her nursing career instead of pursuing something more ambitious that would enhance your social status. I have watched you grow increasingly embarrassed by her background and increasingly resentful that she cannot provide you with the social and financial advantages you believe you deserve." Amanda was shifting uncomfortably in her seat now, clearly recognizing some of her own attitudes in her grandmother's words. "Most troubling of all, I have seen you begin to treat your wife as if she were an employee whose performance was disappointing, rather than a partner whose love and support should be cherished. You have criticized her appearance, suggesting that she needs to dress more expensively to be appropriate for your social circle. You have dismissed her conversation topics as uninteresting to your colleagues. You have made her feel unwelcome at family gatherings by constantly correcting her or explaining things she supposedly doesn't understand." I remembered those moments all too well, the subtle put-downs, the casual dismissals, the way Marcus had begun to make me feel like I was failing at being the kind of wife he needed. There had been dinner parties where he would interrupt me mid-sentence to clarify what I was saying, as if I couldn't be trusted to express myself properly. There had been family gatherings where he would apologize to others for my simple background, as if my upbringing were something shameful that required explanation. You have criticized her family's modest lifestyle and humble origins as if they were character flaws rather than evidence of honest, hardworking people who raised an exceptional daughter. You have made it clear that you see her as an obstacle to your ambitions rather than as a partner in building a meaningful life together." Eleanor turned to the next page, and I could see that there was still substantial content remaining. "Sarah, on the other hand, has shown me a level of character and integrity that has deeply impressed and moved me. During my illness over the past 18 months, she has been my most faithful companion and caregiver. While the rest of you were busy with your own lives, and I understand that you all have important responsibilities, Sarah rearranged her work schedule to spend time with me almost every day." This was true. As grandmother Evelyn's health had declined, I had become her primary support system. Marcus was always too busy with work or social obligations, claiming that his career demanded his full attention. Derek lived in another city and visited only occasionally. Amanda found hospitals depressing and preferred to show her love through expensive gifts rather than personal time. But I had made time to drive grandmother Evelyn to doctor's appointments, help her with physical therapy exercises, organize her medications when she became confused about dosages, and simply sit with her when she was feeling lonely or frightened. She read to me when my eyes were too weak to read myself, not just the newspaper or magazines, but the poetry and literature I had loved throughout my life. She helped me maintain my correspondence with old friends when arthritis made writing difficult. She listened to my stories about your grandfather and our early years together with genuine interest and patience, never making me feel like I was burdening her with the ramblings of an old woman. I remembered those afternoons so clearly, sitting in grandmother Evelyn's sunroom, reading her favorite passages from Langston Hughes or Maya Angelou, listening to her tell stories about her courtship with Charles Whitmore, helping her write letters to friends she had known for 70 years. Eleanor paused in her reading and looked around the table. The initial outrage and protests had given way to uncomfortable silence as the family began to absorb the full scope of grandmother Evelyn's observations. More importantly, Sarah consistently demonstrated values and priorities that aligned with what I had always hoped to instill in my family. When I mentioned to her 6 months ago that I was considering making changes to my will that would benefit her, she argued passionately against it. She insisted that family money should remain with family members, and that she had no right to inherit anything from the Whitmore estate. I had indeed had that conversation with grandmother Evelyn, and it had been one of the most uncomfortable discussions of my life. When she had tentatively mentioned the possibility of including me in her will, I had been horrified and had spent considerable time trying to convince her that such a decision would be catastrophic for my marriage and my relationships with the rest of the family. Her selflessness and integrity in that conversation only confirmed my growing conviction that she was the right person to entrust with the responsibility of carrying on the values that I had hoped to pass down to my descendants. Eleanor turned to a new page of the letter, and I could see that grandmother Evelyn's thoughts were far from finished. "I am leaving my fortune to Sarah because I have observed how she uses whatever resources she has to help others. I have seen her volunteer at the Children's Hospital on her days off, donating her time and expertise to comfort families who are facing their worst nightmares. She works with children who have cancer, with families who cannot afford the medical care their children need, and she does it not for recognition or career advancement, but because she believes it is the right thing to do." All of this was true, though I had never imagined that grandmother Evelyn was paying such close attention to my actions and choices. I had been volunteering at the hospital since I was in college, and it had always been something I did quietly, without fanfare or expectation of reward. I have watched her send money to her parents even when she and Marcus were struggling financially, because she understands that family obligations don't disappear just because they become inconvenient. I have seen her treat my housekeeper, my gardener, and every service worker she encounters with dignity and respect, learning their names, asking about their families, and showing genuine interest in their lives. I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who cleaned grandmother Evelyn's house twice a week, and how she would always light up when she saw me because I was the only family member who spoke to her in Spanish and asked about her grandchildren. Or James, the gardener, who had taught me about the different flowers in grandmother Evelyn's garden and always appreciated that I remembered his advice about caring for the roses. I have also seen her demonstrate remarkable patience and grace in the face of treatment from this family that has often been less than welcoming. Despite being made to feel like an outsider, despite subtle and not so subtle suggestions that she doesn't belong in our social circle, Sarah has continued to approach every family gathering with warmth and genuine desire to build relationships. I thought about the past 3 years of family dinners where conversations would stop when I entered the room, holiday celebrations where I felt like I was constantly being evaluated and found wanting, social events where other family members would introduce me as Marcus's wife, as if I had no identity beyond my relationship to him. Most importantly, I am leaving my fortune to Sarah because I believe that true wealth should be entrusted to people who understand that money is a tool for creating positive change in the world, not just for accumulating status symbols and social advantages. Eleanor's voice took on a more forceful tone as she continued reading. Marcus, I want you to understand something crucial about the choice I have made. This is not a punishment or a rejection of you as a person. This is an attempt to give you the greatest gift I can offer, the opportunity to discover what kind of man you really are when external validation and financial advantage are removed from the equation. Marcus looked up from the table for the first time since the letter reading had begun, his eyes wide with something that might have been panic. I am giving you the chance to learn whether you can love your wife for who she is rather than resenting her for who she isn't. I am offering you the opportunity to build a marriage based on mutual respect and partnership rather than on your expectations of what she should provide for your career and social status. The letter continued for several more pages, each paragraph revealing more of Grandmother Evelyn's careful observations and thoughtful reasoning. I have watched you become increasingly focused on material possessions and social status, as if the accumulation of expensive things could somehow validate your worth as a person. You talk constantly about the house you want to buy, the car you deserve to drive, the vacation destinations that would impress your colleagues. But I have never heard you talk about the kind of husband you want to be, the kind of father you hope to become, or the kind of legacy you want to leave beyond your financial portfolio. Marcus winced at the accuracy of this observation. Sarah, in contrast, talks about the children she hopes to help recover from illness, the family she wants to support through difficult times, and the kind of difference she hopes to make in the world. When she discusses the future, it is always in terms of service and contribution rather than acquisition and status. Eleanor paused to turn another page, and I could see that we were nearing the end of the letter. I am leaving my money to Sarah, but I am leaving you something far more valuable if you are wise enough to recognize it. I am leaving you the opportunity to become the kind of man who deserves a woman like her. If you can learn to value character over connections, love over status, and partnership over dominance, you might still build the kind of life that would make me truly proud. The letter concluded with some practical instructions about the management of the estate and expressions of love for all the family members, but the essential message had been delivered. Grandmother Evelyn had chosen to leave her fortune to me not as a rejection of her family, but as a lesson about values, character, and what it means to build a meaningful life. When Eleanor finished reading, the silence in the room was profound and heavy. I could hear the sound of traffic from the street below, the hum of the air conditioning system, the scratch of Eleanor's pen as she made notes on her legal pad. The weight of Grandmother Evelyn's words seemed to press down on all of us, forcing us to confront truths that had been carefully avoided for years. Marcus was staring at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. His face had cycled through shock, anger, confusion, and now seemed to have settled into something that looked like recognition, as if he were finally understanding something that had been hidden from his view. Robert cleared his throat, breaking the silence that had settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Eleanor, what are the legal implications of this decision? Is there any grounds for contesting the will? Eleanor shook her head firmly, and I could see that she had expected this question. Evelyn anticipated that there might be challenges to her decision, and she took extraordinary measures to ensure that her wishes would be legally unassailable. She underwent comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation to document her mental competence. She consulted with multiple attorneys to ensure the will was properly structured. She created extensive documentation of her reasoning and decision-making process. She opened another folder and spread several documents across the table. She also recorded video testimony explaining her decisions, underwent independent psychiatric evaluation, and had multiple witnesses present during the signing of the will. I can assure you that any attempt to contest this document would be unsuccessful and would likely result in significant legal expenses for the challengers. So Sarah gets everything, Amanda said bitterly, her beautiful features twisted with resentment. $8.5 million goes to someone who's been in this family for exactly 3 years. Someone who doesn't even carry our name, who doesn't understand our history, who has no connection to the sacrifices our grandmother and grandfather made to build this wealth. Amanda, that's enough, Patricia said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. I could see that she was struggling with her own emotions, torn between her instinctive loyalty to family and her growing understanding of her mother's reasoning. But Amanda wasn't finished. Her voice rose as she continued, and I could see years of resentment and jealousy pouring out. This is our inheritance. Our family legacy. Our grandmother's life work. Money that should go to her children and grandchildren, people who share her blood and understand what it means to be a Whitmore. She turned to look directly at me, her eyes blazing with anger, and now it's going to someone who doesn't understand our traditions, who doesn't appreciate what it means to be part of this family, who probably can't even manage that kind of money responsibly. Amanda, Robert's voice was sharp with warning, but she ignored him. Who took better care of Mother in her final months than any of us did, Robert interrupted, his voice heavy with what sounded like shame and regret. Who visited her every day when the rest of us were too busy with our own lives. Who drove her to chemotherapy treatments and sat with her for hours when she was weak and frightened. The truth of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Everyone in this room had been too occupied with their own concerns to provide significant support to grandmother Evelyn during her illness. They had sent flowers, made brief visits, and hired nurses, but none of them had provided the daily companionship and emotional support that I had given freely. I had been the one to help her manage her medications when she became confused about dosages, to accompany her to doctor's appointments when she was too weak to drive herself, to reorganize her kitchen when arthritis made it difficult for her to reach high shelves. I had done it because I loved her and because it felt like the right thing to do, not because I was hoping for any kind of reward. But I realized now that grandmother Evelyn had been observing and evaluating all of us during those months, measuring our actions against our words, our character against our claims to love and devotion. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, did you know? Did you know what grandmother was planning to do?" I looked at my husband, the man I had loved for 4 years, married for 3, and supported through all his struggles with career disappointment and family pressure, and told him the absolute truth. "No, Marcus. I had no idea. When she mentioned the possibility 6 months ago, I begged her not to do it. I told her it would destroy our marriage and my relationships with everyone in this family. But she did it anyway. She did it anyway." Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the large window overlooking the busy street below. He stood there for several minutes, his back to the room, his shoulders rigid with tension. I could see his reflection in the glass, and his expression was one of profound shock and confusion. The busy street below seemed like another world, people hurrying to appointments, cars navigating traffic, everyone focused on their own immediate concerns. Up here in this elegant law office, we were dealing with life-changing revelations that would affect generations to come. When he turned back to face us, his voice was different, more vulnerable and uncertain than I had heard it in years. "I need to ask you something, Sarah, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Everything grandmother said in that letter, about how I've treated you, about my complaints and criticisms, about my resentment of your background, was she accurate?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel everyone in the room waiting for my response. This was my chance to be diplomatic, to soften the blow, to protect Marcus's feelings and preserve family harmony. Instead, I decided to tell the complete truth. "Yes," I said quietly but clearly. "She was accurate about all of it." Marcus nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer but had been hoping I might choose to lie. "And how long have you felt this way? How long have you known that I was treating you badly?" "For about 2 years, Marcus. Since you started talking about how our lives would be different once you received your inheritance from grandmother Evelyn. I didn't realize I was being so obvious about my feelings. You told me 3 weeks ago that you were embarrassed to introduce me to your new colleagues because my family doesn't have connections that could help your career advancement." Several people around the table shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the truth in my statement. "You told me that we should wait to have children until we could afford private schools and nannies because you didn't want our kids to be disadvantaged by having a working mother from a modest background." Marcus winced at the accuracy of my quotation. "You told me that when we received the inheritance, we should consider moving to a neighborhood where people didn't know about my humble origins so we could fit in better with successful people." The silence in the room was absolute. Everything I was saying reflected conversations that Marcus had had not just with me, but apparently with his grandmother as well. "I never meant to hurt you," Marcus said weakly. "Maybe you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did mean the things you said when you said them. You weren't speaking carelessly or impulsively. You were expressing beliefs and attitudes that you had developed over time." Derek spoke up for the first time since the will reading had begun, his voice thoughtful rather than accusatory. "Marcus, I have to ask, why did you marry Sarah if you were ashamed of her background and disappointed in her career choices?" It was a fair and important question, and everyone in the room was clearly interested in the answer. Marcus looked at me for a long moment before responding, and I could see him struggling to find words that would be honest without being cruel. "I married Sarah because I fell in love with her," he said finally. "Because she was the kindest, most genuinely caring person I had ever met. Because she was absolutely beautiful, the most stunning woman I'd ever seen. Because when I was with her, I felt like I was the best version of myself." "And then what changed?" Derek pressed. Marcus's answer was painful in its honesty. "I got scared that love wouldn't be enough. I became obsessed with the idea that I needed to achieve a certain level of material success to prove I was worthy of the Whitmore name. And somewhere along the way, I started seeing Sarah as an obstacle to that success instead of a partner in building a meaningful life." Patricia spoke up, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Sarah, what do you plan to do with the inheritance?" It was a question I hadn't had time to consider, given that I had learned about it only 40 minutes earlier. I don't know, I admitted honestly. I need time to think about what it means and what responsibilities it brings. But I want everyone to understand that I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to come between Marcus and his family or to inherit money that should rightfully stay with blood relatives. But you're not going to refuse it, Amanda said accusingly. I thought carefully before responding, knowing that my answer would shape relationships for years to come. No, I'm not going to refuse it. Grandmother Evelyn made this decision for reasons that she explained very clearly and thoughtfully. She wanted her money to go to someone who would use it to help other people, not just to accumulate possessions or status symbols. So you're going to donate it all to charity? Robert asked. I'm going to donate a significant portion to charitable causes, yes. But I'm also going to use some of it to build the kind of life that Grandmother Evelyn would have wanted me to have, one focused on service and meaningful work rather than on impressing people or maintaining social status. Marcus returned to his seat, moving like a man who had aged several years in the past hour. Sarah, I need to ask you something else, and I'm afraid of what your answer might be. What is it? Do you still love me? After everything I've put you through, after all the ways I've failed as a husband, is there anything left of our marriage worth trying to save? The question caught me off guard, both because I hadn't expected him to ask it so directly in front of his entire family, and because I wasn't entirely sure of the answer myself. I love the man I married 4 years ago, I said carefully. But I'm not sure that man still exists, or if he's been replaced by someone who sees me as a liability rather than a partner. What if I wanted to try to become that man again? What if I wanted to learn how to be the kind of husband who deserves a wife like you? I think that would depend on whether you genuinely want to change, or whether you just want to change because your grandmother left me $8 million. The brutal honesty of my response seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he nodded as if he understood and accepted it. That's completely fair. That's exactly the right question to ask. Eleanor Patterson cleared her throat, reminding all of us that we were having this intensely personal conversation in front of a room full of people. I have additional documents that Sarah will need to review and sign, she said diplomatically, but those can certainly be handled at a separate appointment. For today, I believe we've covered the essential provisions of the will. People began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave, but the atmosphere was entirely different than it had been when we arrived. The shock of Grandmother Evelyn's decision had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, personal values, and the meaning of love and loyalty. As we walked to the parking garage beneath the building, Marcus asked if we could talk privately before going home. We sat in his BMW in the dim fluorescent light of the underground garage, both of us trying to process what had just happened and what it might mean for our future together. The garage was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the emotional intensity of the conference room upstairs. I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the street level, but down here in this concrete cavern, it felt like we were suspended between our old life and whatever was coming next. Sarah, I want you to know that I understand what happened in that room today, Marcus began. I understand that my grandmother saw something in our marriage that I had become blind to. What do you think she saw? She saw that I was in the process of destroying the best thing that had ever happened to me because I was too insecure and materialistic to appreciate what I already had. I waited for him to continue, not sure whether this was genuine insight or simply shock and disappointment talking. She saw that I had married a woman who was intelligent, beautiful, compassionate, and completely devoted to me, and that I was gradually becoming resentful of her for not being wealthy or socially connected. And how do you feel about that assessment? Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring through the windshield at the concrete wall in front of us. I think she was absolutely right, and I think I've been the biggest fool in the world. What makes you say that? Because I'm sitting next to a woman who just inherited $8.5 million, and I realize that the money doesn't change anything about who you are or how I should feel about you. How should you feel about me? I should feel grateful every single day that someone as extraordinary as you chose to marry me. I should feel proud to be your husband instead of embarrassed that you don't come from money. I should be supporting your dreams and celebrating your accomplishments instead of criticizing you for not being ambitious enough. I studied his face in the dim light, trying to determine whether this was genuine remorse or simply the shock of losing an expected inheritance. Marcus, I need you to understand something important. This inheritance doesn't make me a different person. I'm exactly the same woman I was this morning when you were complaining about our apartment and talking about how much better our lives would be once you got your grandmother's money. I know that. I'm the same woman you criticized last month for not being sophisticated enough to help your career, for not having the right kind of social connections, for not understanding the importance of networking and image management. I know, and I was wrong about all of that. Were you wrong, or are you just saying that because the circumstances have changed dramatically? It was a hard question, and I could see him struggling with how to answer honestly. I think I was wrong, but I also think it's going to take me time and effort to truly understand how wrong I was. I think I need to examine a lot of my assumptions about success and marriage and what actually matters in life. And what if that examination leads you to realize that you really do want a different kind of wife? Someone who comes from wealth, someone who can advance your career, someone who fits better with your professional and social ambitions. Then I guess I'll have learned something important about myself that I should have figured out before I got married. But Sarah, I don't think that's what's going to happen. Why not? Because for the first time in years, I'm looking at you and seeing you clearly. Not as someone who doesn't meet my expectations, not as an obstacle to my ambitions, but as the incredible woman I fell in love with. And I'm realizing that she's more extraordinary than I ever gave her credit for. I wanted to believe him, but I also knew that the shock of the day's events might be affecting his judgment. Marcus, I think we need some time apart to process what happened today and figure out what we want our future to look like. Are you asking for a separation? I'm asking for space while we both think about what this inheritance means and what kind of marriage we want to have going forward. Marcus nodded, though I could see disappointment and fear in his expression. How much space? How much time? I don't know yet. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. I need to understand what responsibilities come with this inheritance, and I need to figure out how I want to use it to make a positive difference in the world. And I need to figure out how to be the kind of man who supports and celebrates that instead of resenting it. Yes. We drove home in thoughtful silence, both of us lost in contemplation of how dramatically our lives had just changed. When we reached our modest apartment, the same two-bedroom space that Marcus had been complaining about for months, I found myself seeing it with new eyes. It wasn't a symbol of failure or inadequacy. It was the home where we had learned to live together, where we had shared meals and conversations and dreams for the future. It was where I had tried to build a marriage with someone who hadn't yet learned how to be a true partner. The apartment felt different now, charged with new possibilities and heavy with the weight of decisions that would have to be made. Everything looked the same, the mismatched furniture we had accumulated over 3 years of marriage, the photographs of our wedding and family gatherings, the books and personal belongings that made up our shared life, but everything felt different. Over the following weeks, I began the complex and overwhelming process of learning what it meant to suddenly become wealthy. I met with financial advisors who spoke in terms I barely understood, estate attorneys who explained tax implications and legal structures, and investment managers who presented dizzying arrays of options for managing substantial assets. The meetings were intimidating and exhausting. I would sit in conference rooms similar to the one where my life had changed, surrounded by men and women in expensive suits who treated me with a deference I had never experienced before. They called me Ms. Whitmore, with a respect that was clearly based on the size of my inheritance rather than any personal accomplishments. But more importantly, I began to understand what Grandmother Evelyn had really given me. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom to make choices based on my values rather than my financial limitations. Freedom to help people without worrying about my own security. Freedom to build a life that aligned with my beliefs about service and compassion. I also began to understand the wisdom behind her decision to leave the inheritance to me rather than to Marcus. Over our 3 years of marriage, I had watched him become increasingly obsessed with external markers of success, expensive possessions, impressive job titles, social connections with wealthy and influential people. He had begun to measure his worth through his ability to accumulate status symbols rather than through his character or his contributions to other people's happiness. Grandmother Evelyn had recognized that giving Marcus a large inheritance would only accelerate his descent into materialism and social climbing. By leaving the money to me, she was forcing him to confront his values and decide what kind of person he really wanted to be. Meanwhile, Marcus moved into a furnished apartment across town, and we established a routine of meeting twice a week for dinner to discuss our thoughts and feelings about the inheritance and our marriage. These conversations were often difficult and painful, but they were also more honest and substantive than most of the discussions we had had in the previous 2 years. Gradually, I began to see glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with 4 years earlier. Without the pressure of trying to impress me with his earning potential or social connections, Marcus started to relax into a version of himself that was more genuine, vulnerable, and self-reflective. He also began to examine his own attitudes and behavior in ways that were clearly uncomfortable but necessary. He talked about his fears of not living up to family expectations, his insecurities about his own worthiness, and his confusion about what success actually meant in the modern world. I think I got so focused on trying to prove I deserved to be successful that I forgot to think about what success should actually look like, he told me during one of our dinners. What do you think it should look like now? I think it should mean building a life that makes the people you love happy and proud to be associated with you. I think it should mean using whatever talents and resources you have to make other people's lives better. I think it should mean being someone that others can rely on and trust and respect. And how do you think you were measuring up to those standards? Marcus smiled ruefully. I think I was failing pretty spectacularly on every single count. 6 months after the will reading, I made the decision to use a significant portion of the inheritance to establish a foundation focused on providing medical care and educational support for underprivileged children. It was work that built on my background in pediatric nursing and my volunteer experience, but on a scale I could never have imagined when I was limited by my modest salary. The Sarah Washington Foundation, I chose to use my maiden name to honor my parents and my cultural heritage, began by partnering with Children's Hospital to provide free medical care for families who couldn't afford treatment. But it quickly expanded into educational programs, family support services, and community health initiatives throughout the Atlanta area. The work was challenging and fulfilling in ways that exceeded my wildest expectations. For the first time in my adult life, I had the resources to match my ambitions for helping people. I could identify problems that needed solving and actually solve them, rather than just wishing I could make a difference. I hired a small staff of dedicated professionals who shared my commitment to improving the lives of vulnerable children and families. We developed programs that addressed not just immediate medical needs, but the underlying social and economic factors that contributed to health disparities in underserved communities. Marcus had been supportive of the foundation work from the beginning, but I could see that he was also struggling with his own sense of purpose and direction. His job at the investment firm had begun to feel meaningless and unfulfilling, but he wasn't sure what alternatives might be more aligned with his evolving values. I keep thinking about what grandmother said in her letter, he told me during one of our weekly dinners. About learning to become the kind of man who deserves a woman like you. And what conclusions are you reaching? I don't think I can become that man while I'm spending 50 hours a week helping wealthy people become even wealthier. I don't think I can develop the right priorities and values while I'm working in an environment that's entirely focused on profit maximization and capital accumulation. What would you rather be doing? I think I'd like to work with you on the foundation. I think I'd like to use my business and financial skills to help you expand the programs and serve more families in need. The suggestion surprised me. I had been enjoying the independence and autonomy that came with running my own organization, and I wasn't sure I was ready to share that responsibility with Marcus. That's an interesting idea, I said carefully, but I'd want to be certain you were genuinely interested in the work itself, not just in being involved with something I was doing. How can I prove that to you? Start volunteering with one of our existing programs. Spend time actually working with the children and families we serve. See whether you find the work as meaningful and rewarding as I do. Marcus began volunteering with our educational support program, helping children from low-income families with homework assistance and college preparation. I watched him interact with these kids and their parents, and I could see something fundamental shifting in his perspective and priorities. For the first time in years, he was working with people whose problems couldn't be solved with money or social connections. He was helping children who needed encouragement and academic support more than they needed material possessions. He was learning to measure success in terms of test scores improved and college applications completed rather than dollars earned or status achieved. After 3 months of volunteer work, Marcus approached me with a more formal proposal. Sarah, I want to quit my job and come work for the foundation full-time. I want to be your partner in this work, not just your husband who supports what you're doing from the sidelines. The foundation can't afford to pay you anything close to what you're earning now, I warned him. I don't care about the salary. I care about doing work that matters. I care about being part of something that makes a real difference in people's lives. I care about working alongside you to build something that would make grandmother Evelyn proud. I looked at the man sitting across from me and realized that he was no longer the same person who had resented my background and criticized my career choices. The volunteer work with disadvantaged children had helped him discover aspects of himself that had been buried under years of materialism and social ambition. Are you absolutely certain about this, Marcus? Because this isn't just about changing jobs. This is about fundamentally changing how you define success and what you want your life to be about. I'm completely certain. I want to be the kind of person who uses his advantages and privileges to help people who haven't had the same opportunities. I want to be worthy of being married to someone who has dedicated her life to serving others. A year after grandmother Evelyn's death, Marcus and I renewed our wedding vows in a simple ceremony at the Children's Hospital Chapel. Instead of expensive flowers and elaborate decorations, we were surrounded by some of the families our foundation had helped, along with colleagues from the hospital and close friends who understood the significance of this commitment. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. The chapel was small and intimate, with stained glass windows that cast colorful light across the assembled guests. Instead of a formal processional, I walked down the short aisle to where Marcus was waiting, both of us wearing simple but elegant clothing rather than elaborate wedding attire. The vows we exchanged were very different from the ones we had spoken at our original wedding ceremony. Instead of traditional promises about richer or poorer, we committed to using whatever resources we had been given to serve others and to support each other in building a life based on compassion and service rather than competition and acquisition. Marcus's family attended the ceremony, and I could see that their attitudes toward me had changed dramatically over the course of the year. They had watched me use the inheritance not for personal luxury or social climbing, but to create programs that were making genuine differences in people's lives. They had seen Marcus become happier and more fulfilled than he had been in years. Most importantly, they had begun to understand that Grandmother Evelyn's unexpected decision had been motivated by profound wisdom and love rather than favoritism or caprice. After the ceremony, Patricia approached me with tears in her eyes. She was still stunningly beautiful, her makeup flawless despite her emotion. "Sarah, I owe you a sincere and heartfelt apology. When Mother left you the inheritance, I was angry, confused, and resentful. I thought you had somehow manipulated her, or that she was punishing our family for reasons I didn't understand." "I can understand why you felt that way," I replied. "It was a shocking decision that none of us expected. But now I see what she saw," Patricia continued. "She knew that giving you the money would force all of us to examine our values and priorities. She knew it would either destroy your marriage or make it stronger than it could have been any other way. I think she also knew that Marcus needed to learn what it meant to love someone completely and unconditionally, without reservations or resentments." Patricia nodded. "And she knew that you would use her money to honor her memory in ways that would make her genuinely proud." 5 years after the reading of Grandmother Evelyn's will, the Sarah Washington Foundation had grown into one of the most respected and effective charitable organizations in the Southeast. We had helped thousands of families access medical care, supported hundreds of students through college, and created programs that were being studied and replicated by other foundations across the country. Marcus had found his calling as the foundation's executive director, using his business acumen to expand our reach and improve our efficiency. He had also discovered a talent for fundraising, bringing in millions of dollars in additional donations from individuals and corporations who were inspired by our mission and impressed by our results. But more importantly, he had become the kind of husband that Grandmother Evelyn had always hoped he could be. He was proud of my work and accomplishments. He valued my opinions and insights. He saw our partnership as a source of strength and mutual support rather than competition or conflict. The inheritance had indeed transformed both of our lives, but not in the way that either of us had originally anticipated. It hadn't made us wealthy in the traditional sense. The vast majority of the money went directly to the foundation's programs and operations. Instead, it had made us rich in purpose, meaning, and mutual respect. Sometimes I thought about what might have happened if Grandmother Evelyn had left the inheritance to Marcus as everyone expected. I suspected he would have used it to purchase the expensive house, luxury cars, and country club memberships he had always wanted. We might have been financially comfortable, but I doubted we would have been truly happy or fulfilled. Her unexpected decision had forced both of us to examine our values, priorities, and assumptions about what constitutes a meaningful life. It had given us the opportunity to build a marriage based on shared purpose and mutual admiration rather than shared possessions or social status. On the 5th anniversary of Grandmother Evelyn's death, Marcus and I visited her grave with a thick photo album documenting all the work the foundation had accomplished in her honor. We told her about the families we had helped, the students we had supported through college, and the community programs we had created with her legacy. "Do you think she knew this would happen?" Marcus asked as we sat beside her headstone. "Do you think she anticipated that leaving you the money would change both of our lives so completely?" "I think she understood that we both had the potential to become better people than we were at the time," I replied. "I think she knew that sometimes it takes a dramatic shock to force people to examine their assumptions and make different choices." "I'm grateful to her," Marcus said quietly. "Not just for the inheritance, but for seeing possibilities in us that we couldn't see in ourselves." As we drove home from the cemetery, I reflected on the lessons that Grandmother Evelyn had tried to teach us through her unexpected bequest. She had understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the love we give and receive, the service we provide to others, and the character we demonstrate through our daily choices and actions. She had also understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't what they want or expect, but what they need to become the person they were meant to be. By leaving her fortune to me instead of Marcus, she had given both of us the chance to discover what it meant to build a life of genuine meaning and purpose. She had shown us that the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to use whatever resources we have to make the world better and to love the people in our lives without reservation, condition, or resentment. The granddaughter-in-law who had been dismissed as an outsider had become the guardian of the family's most important values. The woman who had been criticized for lacking ambition had built an organization that was changing thousands of lives every year. And the man who had almost destroyed his marriage in pursuit of status and wealth had discovered that his greatest success came not from what he could accumulate, but from what he could give away in service to others. Grandmother Evelyn had seen all of this potential in us, even when we couldn't see it in ourselves. Her final gift wasn't just financial, it was the opportunity to become the kind of people who deserved to be trusted with great resources and great responsibility. In the end, that was the most valuable inheritance of all.